Hi, this is Ebru. I'm the leader at Prague Training Academy. This week at PTA, we are discussing the reinvented leadership. As you know, this is theme for the International Leadership Week. Today I have Lisa with me, Lisa Blackett. She is leadership well-being coach and also one of our trainers. And I'm gonna ask her lots of questions around the reinvented leadership. We will be putting two words together, which is very difficult from traditional leadership perspective. It is compassion and leadership. Welcome, Lisa. I'm very delighted to have you here.
Thank you, Ebru. I'm really pleased to be here as well.
Thank you. Lisa, so how do you see the reinvented leadership?
So, reinvented leadership for me is the emergence of leaders who look beyond the immediacy of quarterly profits and unsustainable gains. They're leaders who understand the importance of their people, both as a key, if not the key, asset and stakeholder of their business, and that they're intrinsically connected to both the outcome and the outputs of the organization. So it's leadership that as a minimum does no harm, but ideally goes beyond that to have a positive impact for all the stakeholders. So this leadership is purpose and values driven, not just in words, but in actions. So it's courageous, compassionate, creative, and collaborative. That's a lot of C's, but so this kind of leadership is resilient and better able to navigate the uncertainty and challenges facing us today. And I could just add that I'm feeling optimistic that there is, a wave of awareness and acceptance in this type of leadership, and that organizations are embracing a more compassionate and purpose-led approach in leadership.
Yeah, you said challenge. So what is the biggest challenge that leadership is facing at the moment?
Yeah, it's a long list, isn't it? So there's no shortage of challenges presenting themselves to organizations, governments, leaders everywhere, whether it's a small company or a big organization. So it's complexity and uncertainty. Some will refer to it even as radical uncertainty and wicked challenges or wicked problems. So obviously we've got the ongoing challenges of the pandemic. Obviously the healthcare system, but also all of us, still are looking at some form of working from home or hybrid working. And I shouldn't say all of us, because obviously there's many people who could never work from home. We've got net zero requirements, things like cybersecurity, burnout, stress, and on the list goes. So, and for some organizations, it's huge. I mean, the risk is actually obsolescence or a complete transformation of their core deliverables. Like I said, healthcare organizations have huge challenges, not just in dealing with all the patients, but all the, excessive workloads, and other sectors like tourism, hospitality, education. I mean, it's really difficult to think of any sort of organization, business, government that isn't dealing with all of these challenges, but some of the organizations, even just a few. Nobody's exempt, I think, from this uncertainty.
Yeah, you're very right. Yeah, so overall, I think across the globe, we are going through some challenges, and the leadership has been challenged, with this current climate out there, very, very much. Okay, so Lisa, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, without any roadmap, right? Nobody knew what to do, particularly in the working from home type of thing. It was like, well, okay, this is unprecedented.
Yeah, exactly. Like who would have predicted that 20 months ago, right? Like this whole thing will be starting, and it had a huge impact on us, and I think it will continue to have. Okay, so we, the topic of today is the compassionate leadership. So why compassionate leadership is really an important topic today?
Because with these challenges, especially things like complexity and uncertainty, they can really only be solved with collaboration, creativity, and innovation. And these things, collaboration, creativity, and innovation, come from an environment of trust, of openness, of authenticity, employee engagement, even things like psychological safety, and ultimately everybody's well-being. You can't have this really dynamic, creative organization if you don't have that kind of environment. And they can't really be solved by someone just leading from the front, who thinks they have all the answers and everybody can just follow them. The issues are too complex for that, and they need many minds and hearts and perspectives, and when we're able to collaborate, the sum is greater than the parts, and we're able to really to solve problems. So compassionate leadership is the basis of that well-being of the organization and that flourishing and fostering environment, which leads to the solutions. And if you think about the opposite of compassionate leadership, somebody who doesn't listen, doesn't care, or trusts or thinks that they have the best answers, sort of dictates rather than facilitates, what kind of environment does that create, right? Fear, stress, at the very least stagnation, because if you've not got that sense of openness and ability to voice what's going on, then you're going to be risk averse, and that's going to be organizational, not just individual. People just do what they have to do to get by, or even compete amongst themselves. We know from all the neuroscience that this sort of environment leads to people trying to survive rather than thrive. And it switches our brain, to be wary and untrusting and, just kind of close up rather than being open, collaborative, and creative. So a compassionate environment is essential for that kind of growth and creativity.
Yeah. And this point is very essential. Still, most people think compassion is a word that should be taken out of workspace. How would you address that?
Yeah, no, I understand, because you think about compassion, you think of a really lovely carer or nurse or somebody, and I think it's because actually the word is possibly not well understood. It can be assumed that it's all soft and nice and agreeable and happy and fuzzy and all that. And the risk would be, too much of that niceness can take the edge off the business, take your eye off the ball, and everybody have nice teas together. So let's just clarify what compassion is then. So it is based on a really basic human need, one of our key ones, and that is to care. Whether everybody acknowledges it or not is another story, but we have a basic human need to care, and it is more, and compassion is more than that feeling. It's an action. It's not just empathy, it's not just that connection with others, but it's the connecting and the need to take action. And that action is actually, and I'll introduce another slightly controversial term, and that's to alleviate suffering. Compassion is action taken to alleviate suffering. So then that might lead to another question. It's like, suffering, what does that have to do with work, right?
Yeah.
So
especially from traditional leadership point of view, that question will be coming from the audience, I guess.
And fair enough, right? Because in traditional structures, we don't think about these things, and we feel like you're just at work. When you're at work, it's just about work. It's not about you as a person. It's not about your feelings or whatever. Just do your job. But that's not realistic, because as humans, we're systems, just like the organization is the system, and there's only one of us, right? We don't have necessarily a work self and a home self, and if we do, we'll probably have a lot of cognitive dissonance and incongruence. So again, we're working with one mind, one heart, and one body here. So work environment. So if we touch on the previous, the work environment, I was describing that, where it's more directive or authoritative. People feel stressed. and
Yeah,
uncertain. Yeah, and even fearful. So you've got the stress of the external stuff that the organization doesn't control. So the pandemic, the climate change, although some of that's impacted, and everything else that goes on. And then there's things that happen to us we don't control. But if you're also feeling uncertain at work, if you're also feeling like you don't have control over how you do your job, or you're not listened to, or you're overworked, underpaid, disrespected, whatever, you're suffering.
Yeah.
And suffering manifests as stress, illness, attitudinal problems, and people all over are suffering right now, and in the workplace. And of course, managers themselves are suffering. They don't know how to do a lot of this stuff, working with their teams, working from home. Some people love it, some people hate it. Some people, feel isolated and disconnected from their
Very
teams.
Much. Yeah. Go
ahead.
Yeah. This is, I think, one of the biggest challenge that the leaders are looking at, like why the people are that much feeling isolated. They are not connected, and they are, not feeling part of the culture, especially for the newcomers, that's one of the area where,
we're wired to connect, right?
Yeah,
humans make relationships. It's a real basic human thing. And meaningful relationships is one of the foundations of life satisfaction, and that applies in the workspace too, right? So I think we really can't underestimate the impact all of this is having, and that need to connect. And we know with all the neuroscience and stuff, we're really driven by these needs, and we do our best. It's not to say that we can't function out with these things, but not for very long. And we really do our best when we're connecting and collaborating and have a shared sense of purpose. So even the most recent Gallup work studies showed that something like 21% of profit increase in organizations where the workforce is really engaged, and engaged is having those conversations, having those relationships, having a shared sense of purpose, having shared values. So it isn't just a soft fuzzy thing, it impacts the bottom line as well. So it doesn't take a lot of understanding of neuroscience to know that people, do they work better when they're suffering or when they're not, right? And I guess the other thing is, with all this uncertainty, we kind of, are at risk of going into this fight or flight or freeze mode, or conversely into a more depressive state. And that sort of autonomic balance that we all need to perform at our best is lost when you've got all that uncertainty and stress. And so we don't function cognitively as well. We don't make as good decisions. Or, if we manage to kind of push through, at some point there will be consequences. I cannot tell you how many people I've coached in the last year that are home, not even working, that with stress and burnout and taking huge swaths of time off because they've just had it. They actually cannot function anymore. And they think something's wrong with them, I'm crying all the time, or I just can't, I freeze every time somebody asks me a question. And it's because, they've gone out of that autonomic nervous balance. They've gone into the really primal part of the brain to protect themselves. So you don't want employees who are working in a survival mode. You want them, thriving. And the only way they can thrive is if they're shown compassion, and that we alleviate their suffering and certainly don't cause it. So, and it's easy in a way, it's about listening to understand. It's about respect, caring, wanting the best, wanting to make a difference and taking that action. So it's beyond an intellectual understanding of other people's problems and concerns. It's action that shows heartfelt understanding. And it doesn't mean that you accept everything people say or do, you know, but it is seeking to understand.
Yeah, very nice. Very well said, actually. Yeah. I mean, yeah, by this, you already answered my next question. I was going to ask you, what is compassionate leadership?
Well, you know, I suppose I can add it really starts with being aware of how you lead.
Awareness is key.
So, you know, so leaders have to step back and kind of meta-position themselves and go, okay, well, how am I leading? Am I leading compassionately? You know, what are my values? You know, what do I care about? Is it profit? Which is fine. Profit's fine. It's not an evil thing. But, you know, what about having a positive impact? And is that profit at the cost of things, you know, of either the people or the organization or the community? I mean, these things aren't mutually exclusive. So, you know, again, like I said before, the people are your asset in most organizations, of course. And so without looking after them, the organization isn't going to be at its best. And you'll see it, you know, you'll see it in sickness absent, in presenteeism, in attrition. So, and it's also about paying attention to the bigger picture, you know, so your employees are people, and people have families, and families are in communities, and communities in society, and so on. So, you know, it really goes out. So if you're a compassionate leader, you encourage compassionate behavior, and that has a knock-on effect. And we all want to live in a better society where people's well-being is at the forefront of decision-making. You know, I mean, I think it's an interesting question if people are asked, you know, if leaders are asked, you know, what do they care about? Is it the profit, or, you know, what about your grandchildren in the future? What if you were to focus on that? What actions would you take differently, for example?
Yeah.
So it's about that positive impact.
Yeah, you just mentioned about the positive impact and also the profit. So how can we translate the bringing the, you know, compassion to the business into success? How would they be able to use it? What's the formula?
Oh, the formula is listening and inclusion and diversity. I know those are big buzzwords now, but the more we understand, again, from research, from science, about human diversity of thought, experience, culture, gender, sexuality, ability, everything, the more we realize that it's impossible for one person or even a small group of people to know everything or have the best solutions. So harnessing that diversity, really tapping into it, really listening to it, gives an organization a huge advantage. So they'll understand what impact they have on multiple stakeholders, you know, those who really feel their influence or consequences, and get much greater, you know, breadth of solutions and input from as many angles as possible. And I met a leader last week in a professional services and environment who really embraced this. And not only did it shift the culture within the organization, but it moved them up into, you know, the top few of that particular professional services industry, which wasn't the intention. It's not like, oh gosh, you know, we want to be doing better. Let's increase our diversity. Let's start being more compassionate and listen to people. They did it because they had to, you know. I mean, there was awareness, and of course, you know, more and more organizations are bowing to legislation, to pressure, to, you know, to employee voices, but it actually impacted their bottom line very positively. So bringing compassion into leadership in the workplace means that, you know, leaders really listen to the workforce. They care about them, allow them to make mistakes, feel safe and trusted. Trust is built, relationships fosters, collaboration enhanced, and high performance is achieved. So, and then, you know, if you develop that shared sense of purpose, values, and caring, then everybody's on the same page, and decisions made all can point in the same direction.
And probably, right, like I say probably, but like this is how I believe, then this translates into performance, right, and the motivation.
Absolutely.
That's where
that's why I said, organizations who are engaged see a 21% increase in profitability, on average from that study. And I think it was 18 or 17% increase in productivity, however they happen to measure that. So, I think it's a win-win-win. I mean, there's a huge amount of research now on well-being, life satisfaction, flourishing, happiness even. And people who feel that way are so much more motivated and want to do a good job and want to achieve. One of our cornerstones too of happiness is contribution and achievement. We want to do good at our jobs, right? And so if we're in an environment where we can, and like I said, it's also the collaborative effect. The sum is always greater than the parts when people are working together. So it's not just lovely, fluffy stuff. There's a lot of evidence out there, and a lot of really big thought leaders that, you wouldn't have thought before are coming out with this stuff. And so it's really positive. That's why I said I'm sort of quite optimistic about it.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah. So how does a leader, the traditional leader, can become a compassionate leader? How the transformation happens and where it happens?
It does require taking a bit of a pause, probably, and like I said, kind of stepping back. But it is about starting with yourself. And that's almost contradictory to caring for other people, right? Start with yourself, but it's it really is that old thing of when you get on an airplane, you have to put your oxygen mask on first and then help others. So you have to really understand what your own purpose and values are. What's really truly important to you.
Yeah.
Why are you doing what you're doing? What's your why?
Yeah.
And the reason that's important is because once you're clear yourself in what you believe in, you are so much more likely to believe in and trust others. You're more aligned, authentic, and congruent, and you're less prone to fear and stress yourself. So as a congruent, values and purpose-led leader, you're sort of got that autonomic nervous system balance where you can make those really clear decisions and courageous decisions, sometimes hugely courageous decisions, because it's not easy being a leader. And I honestly believe this does make it easier because you're not in fear anymore, and that the more you trust people, the more they've got your back, right? And starting with yourself also means, and again, maybe a controversial term, but self-compassion.
Yeah.
And that means, really looking after yourself and your own well-being. So becoming congruent and values-based helps, but you need resilience and to increase your capacity to manage and change and challenge. But so what action do you need to be your best self? And of course only you can answer that. And it's not just going to a yoga class or starting meditation, although perhaps those things do work for you, but it's about forgiving your own mistakes, accepting your own humanity, becoming more humble, leaving your ego at the door and going, we're all human. I could have done things better at that meeting or at that job, or God, I really screwed up with that client, but it's okay. Everybody does at some point, and let it go. Because again, by learning to forgive yourself, you will forgive others, and forgiveness and allowing of mistakes, creates a growth mindset and a growth environment rather than one of fear. So, listening, and then as you develop yourself, It's really cultivating, and it's the easiest and the hardest thing to do, but it's cultivating a skill of listening with presence, fascination, respect, and openness, and not judgment. It can be difficult to listen and be fully present, but it's possible. And once you've learned how to do it, it's hard to go back. It's very difficult not to care when we listen carefully.
Yeah.
When we listen to hear and not to judge and not to respond. We're all wired to connect, as I said before, and care. I mean, we even have these mirror neurons, which really encourage us to understand each other. And so it leads to your own engagement and that of others being much higher. So give more than take, to people, to the organization, focus on the well-being of people, but it doesn't mean at your expense. That's the whole thing about all of this is, the more you do these things positively, the less it costs you, and the less it costs the people, and the less it costs the organization, and the better everybody does. So effective leaders need courage, creativity, as well as compassion. And starting with compassion makes others, the others more possible and positive.
So 3 C's to success for leading.
And they need to even more C's, like collaboration.
And yeah, absolutely, some 4 C's. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us at the International Leadership Week, Lisa.
It's my absolute pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm very much delighted to listen your view on the compassionate leadership and how we reinvented the leadership actually in that matter. So thank you so much. In the upcoming days, we will be running a workshop, and I'm very much looking forward to that as well.
Me too.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Ebru. See you soon. Thank you.
See you.